Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be listening to a compilation of some true scary stories. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true scary stories. A few years back, I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 a.m., and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything. And I actually love nights like this, because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker catches my attention, as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air, 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright light coming down from the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was kind of freaked out. I'm sure that alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I don't know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO could look like, I'd paint whatever the heck that I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. Years ago, my dad took my mom, my sister, and myself to one of his interstate routes and made it a camping trip where we would set up a tent each night. One night, we stopped in the middle of nowhere and set up. During the middle of the night, my mom really needed to pee, but was worried as she could hear strange noises. She woke us all up, and all we could hear was what sounded like heaps of people walking around us. This was super freaky as we were hours from a big town. Dad ended up grabbing a cricket bat and a torch, freaking out that stuff was about to go down. He opened up the tent flap ready to defend us, and we were surrounded by cows. There were hundreds of them. Apparently, the area that we were in was known for faceless grazing, where the cows could go where they please. Mom just hung on for the night. This was in Australia, by the way. And from memory, it was in the Northern Territory. My dad was a long-haul trucker years back. He would drive from Ontario all over the United States. The one creepy encounter that I remember him mentioning was as he was passing through Florida. Of course. He was driving through the Everglades late into the night, out in the middle of nowhere. No civilization for miles either way, when he notices a white figure come into the headlights or on the shoulder of the road. He slows down, and there is a man completely naked coming out of the swamp. My father slows and stops in the road, thinking that this guy may need help. As this man starts crossing over the road, he stops dead in front of the truck and stares at my dad, at which point my dad realizes that this naked man is holding a shotgun. He stands there for a few seconds staring, holding this gun, and then continues across and disappears back into the wilderness whence he came. It left so many questions unanswered. not a truck driver, but my dad always tells me the story of when he was backpacking alone with his dog in the Pacific Crest Trail in Northern California in the late 70s. My dad had parked his car on the side of a highway, and he and his dog were about 7 miles down the trail. It was getting to be late in the afternoon, so he was hoping to find a place to spend the night. Suddenly, his dog starts to make a low growl, and the hair on the back of her neck stands up. My dad was thinking there was possibly a bear or something nearby, as his dog was a very experienced backpack dog and was not easily rattled by things. He looks around and doesn't see anything. He notices that Mika is basically pointing out a spot on the trail with her nose a little bit ahead of them. He decides to walk up and see what she's looking at. And there, he finds a massive footprint. To hear him describe it, this footprint was larger than any human can make. Extremely deep and had claw punctures. He said he stood and stared at it in disbelief for at least 5 minutes because he didn't understand how this could possibly have been on the trail. He thought that perhaps it was a hoax or folks messing around, but he hadn't seen a soul and he was in the middle of nowhere. Who would come out to the middle of the trail where there were hardly any hikers and make a hoax footprint of some sort? And why would the dog be upset? He said he couldn't explain it, but he basically had this feeling of terror and turned around on the trail right then. He didn't know if it was his mind playing tricks on him, but he swore he heard sounds in the trees nearby that sounded like a large animal as he booked it out. His dog remained completely alarmed the whole hike back, whimpering and pacing, which was out of character. He said he basically ran 7 miles back down the trail as fast as he could with his pack on and tore out of there in his car. To this day, he still claims that it was one of the freakiest things that he's ever experienced. I was making a delivery out in the middle of somewhere in the Midwest, literally rolling fields as far as you could see. After I made my delivery, I didn't have any time to get anywhere else, and it was getting late, so I just parked on their property and took my 10. It was kind of creepy because there were no lights, but I was tired, so I closed my curtains, locked my doors, and laid down to sleep. About 3 hours from my break being over, it sounded like what I could only describe as about 5 to 10 people pushing on either side of my truck, making it rock back and forth, and what sounded like hands frantically beating on the sides of my truck. I didn't sleep anymore during that break, and it's the only time I ever logged a pre-trip inspection that was less than 3 seconds. As soon as I could get my duty status changed, I went on the drive line and hauled butt out of there. My door stayed locked until it was daylight, and I could get to a truck stop that had a decent amount of people at it. Never found out what it was either. I never found any handprints or any evidence of tampering on my truck. Okay, so I was at one point a truck driver, but this didn't happen to me or to someone driving a truck. But it did happen at night on the road. So my friend was in a car with his 3 friends, driving out Long Island somewhere. They had been out at a bar or something until it closed and were heading home. The driver notices that they're being followed by another car. Everyone's like, "Nah, you're crazy." He pulls off at the next exit. The car follows. He proceeds right back onto the highway, and the other car still follows. Okay, now everyone is losing their minds. It's not a cop car, and it looks like there are 4 guys in that car too. For whatever reason, my friends have one of those 30,000 candle power flashlights, so they decide to light these guys up. They aim out the back window and switch it on. In the car behind them are 4 dudes with Jason Voorhees hockey masks on. My friends scream, and the now blinded hockey mask dudes scream and pull over. My friends got away. I work in northern Nevada nightly, running between Reno and Salt Lake City, pulling triples. I only work nights, so I'm used to working at night and don't really ever get sleepy. So I'm positive that this wasn't a hallucination. Well, I had to take my break, so I pulled onto an on-ramp at around 3 a.m. near Halleck, Nevada, and started surfing the internet. I distinctly remember it being a moonless night, which meant that it was about as dark as it gets in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Out of the corner of my eye, I catch something moving in my mirror at the very back of my third trailer, more than 100 feet away. There are tons of perpendicularly opposed lights on our trailer, so whatever is moving is only illuminated for a split second at a time. When I get the chance to focus on it, I realize that someone is sprinting up my set towards the cab with something in each hand. Luckily, I was idling on a steep incline and clutched in and stuck it in fourth and gunned it. In hindsight, I'm glad I wasn't as heavy as I usually am and could really get up to speed quickly. I only take my breaks now in well-populated areas. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when I had one of my tires blow out. I pulled over and went to call AAA, but I had no service on my phone, so I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said, "Yes, thank you, officer," and he said, "'Cause you're in luck. I just so happen to know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town, and you could get all fixed up. No problem." The mosquitoes were eating me alive, and frankly, I only had a donut-style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it. So I said, "Yes, please," and the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived and the officer left. The driver asked, "Where am I towing you to?" So I was like, "I'm not sure, to town, I guess. Somewhere where I can get my tire fixed." He said, "Well, you're in luck, because I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you." I said, "Okay, sounds good," and he towed us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town, if you could even call it a town. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and talked for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind, there was nobody else there but me and my passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally, they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills, one for the repair and one for the tow, $1,200 in total, for one tire and a 5-mile tow, for a 1991 Grand Am that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious but had no options. So I gave him my credit card and he was like, "Sorry, guy, we're a cash-only kind of town, hey." I was like, "Okay then, well I don't have any cash on me, so how are we going to settle this up then?" And he was like, "Well, you're in luck, because there's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns." So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 3 on 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter, and in addition to the gas station attendant, there stood the cop, the tow truck driver, and the repair guy, all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed, and potentially maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, that cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bites. My grandpa was in the Teamsters Union for over 30 years. Teamsters is a driving and trucking labor union based on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. He was a great trucker. In fact, he only had one minor incident in his 30-plus years of trucking. He was coming back from a long haul and was on Highway 55 in New Jersey, which is known as the most dangerous highway in New Jersey. Another thing most locals know about 55 is that a large amount of Native American artifacts were dug up and found during the highway's construction and repairs. Now back to the story. Gramps was 30 minutes from home, and it was dark out. He was later in his trucking career, and had already had 20 years or so under his belt. And again, not a single accident. Out of nowhere, anywhere from 3 to 5 human silhouettes dart out from the left side of the highway to the right. Grandpa was understandably startled, and swerved his rig to the left, whereas the figures had made it to the right already. He scraped the cab and trailer against the guardrail, and braked as hard as he could. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror to see the last of the figures duck into the tree line. He waited there for 10 minutes, just replaying what just happened in his head, even though the whole ordeal was over in 5 seconds. He never got a good look at the group for obvious reasons, but he said that they ran with what looked like canes in their hands and were wearing rags. He's from Philly, and moved to southern Jersey after he married my grandma. So yeah, he is a Philly city homeboy big time. Of course, he knows Native existed, but never of the kind on the East. Just the ones that hunt buffalo in the Clint Eastwood movies. It's pretty obvious that the canes were either spears or bows, and the rags the figures wore were animal hides or crude cloth. When he returned home, he was still shaken, and never talked with his wife, my grandma, at first. He only opened up about this with his trucking buddies, until one of them recommended that he should indeed tell his wife about the situation. So yeah, that's the story. I tagged along with my grandpa in his truck, since I was able to go to the bathroom on my own say about the age of 5. When school started, I left with him every break we had. Then most over all of Europe before I turned 12. Once in Austria in the summer, we were driving on a smaller highway, and Grandpa really needed to use the bathroom in the middle of nowhere. So we pulled over on the shoulder, and he grabbed some paper and his flashlight, and went around the front of the truck to the ditch. I rolled down my window as I waited in the cabin. After around 1 minute, I hear my grandpa shouting in despair, "Open the door, boy." I see him running along the positioning lights, alongside the trailer towards my door, pants along his knees. I popped the door wide open, and he flew up the steps into the back seat, screaming words that I've never heard before. And he taught me a lot of bad words along them roads. He slams the door and said, "Look outside," as I heard crazy commotion outside. He shined the ground outside, and there outside were 2 absolutely mental wild boars, headbutting and fighting the lower parts of our truck. My grandpa caught his breath and explains, as he pulled his pants down, a car passed and he saw a body with a leather suit and MC helmet laying in a ditch some 5 meters away. He shined his light and it seemed to be moving. A split second later, a boar looked out from inside the leather jacket covered in blood and mess. The second one must have been close by. Experienced as he was, he just ran for the truck without even pulling his pants up. We notified the local authorities and then drove off the first truck stop way down that road. Grandpa's need for going to the restroom didn't seem that important anymore. We were scared, but boy, did we tell that story to everyone that we ever met on the road. This one happened when I was hauling freight from New York to Nevada. I worked for a company that has many acronyms, and all of them bad. The company was pretty good, but never home. I always passed this ghost town on the border of New Mexico and Texas. Every time I passed through it, I got chills. I swore to never stop in that town because the closest town was a good 50 miles away, if not more. Unfortunately, I was unlucky, as my hours for that day had me stuck right in the center of that town. I pulled into the 70s era gas station and walked around. I thank God that I had my mag light, on steroids flashlight, as it made everything bright as day. I didn't find anything but boarded up windows and a swinging door to a hole in the ground toilet. I finished up my business, and thank God that I didn't need to sit down. I did my walk around and checked everything we were supposed to. A truck in tip-top shape is a truck. You never will be stranded in the middle of nowhere. I did this 3 times as my standard custom because I was a nervous Nelly. I got into my truck and checked everything inside and made sure no hitchhikers came, then closed all of my curtains to wind down after locked everything. I wasn't moving, and my freight wasn't going to be disturbed out here. After getting about 3 hours of sleep, I woke up to knocking. I was slow to it until I heard bam, 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 bam on my driver's side door. I rushed to the driver's side and turned my flashlight down. No one was there and no footsteps. I thought that was odd and opened the door, looked around all over the place and saw nothing. Got out, grabbed my keys and locked the door. Walked around the entire rig and noticed I only saw my shoe prints. I checked on everything and nothing was wrong. I did one more pass before I heard a bam, bam, bam on the passenger side this time. I ran over there quickly to see nothing there. I sighed to myself and prayed as I did another pass around the rig. Maybe someone was pulling a prank and being a jerk. I didn't see anyone at all and started to panic a little. If they climbed on my rig, I was going to be angry. I climbed into the truck after unlocking it. I said a prayer and went to bed. The next morning I did my morning pass and noticed what looked to be animal tracks. I shrugged it off as another animal being idiots. I said a prayer of thanks after I finished checking and swore to end my day early if I'm not halfway through my hours for that day, if I pass through that town again. I don't do trucking anymore after several problems, and now work as a caregiver for my grandfather. Many years ago, I was driving south on a freeway in the middle of Utah. I haven't seen another car coming or going for miles, even though it's the middle of the day. Then I see a semi ahead in the right lane of this 2-lane southbound freeway. I'm gaining on him in my lovely red sports car, so I pull into the left lane to pass. I was slightly over the speed limit to pass him quickly. He was doing slightly under the speed limit. There is no shoulder because it's some kind of bridge or culvert crossing. Remember, no other cars anywhere around. Just as I reach the halfway point on the semi, he starts changing lanes for no reason, into my lane. I have nowhere to go because there is no shoulder, and I'm going to die. Time slowed. The world blurred. Somehow I floored it in time, and my wonderful car flung me forward and ahead of death. He was fully in my lane when I looked in the rearview mirror. I have no doubt that he tried to kill me. It was clear, sunny, and he had nothing in front of him that would cause him to change lanes. There were no curves to hide my very red car as I overtook him. He could easily see me coming on the long straightaway. There was absolutely no reason for him to change lanes right as I was passing him. This part of the freeway was always isolated back in the day. There were no cars near us. No animals, and I saw no car for the next few miles as I raced away from him. If he tapped my car or if I overreacted, it probably would have looked like an unfortunate accident. I was a bus driver, and I did what they call the first sign on shifts, which are the first buses out of the depot. I usually started around 3:30 to 4 a.m., and one day I was running late for work, and I was naughty and didn't do my pre-departure check, and took off out of the depot. I was about halfway to the starting point of my route, in a bus that is pitch black with interior lights off, when I hear a voice right behind me say, "Where are we?" I absolutely crapped myself. Look up, and here is this homeless guy standing right behind me in the bus. I said, "What the heck are you doing on the bus?" And it turns out he slept in it overnight, and because I didn't do my pre-departure check, I didn't notice him. Guess who never missed doing a pre-departure check ever again? My dad isn't a trucker, but he used to take me with him to go to various cities and provinces to deliver some packages. I remember this creepy night since it happened when I was a teenager. We were driving across a highway at nighttime, maybe around 9 p.m. We were talking, laughing, and I was joking with him. And all of a sudden, he slammed on his brakes, and I almost hit the windscreen. I was like, "Dad, what's wrong?" Turn around. His face was so pale, and he said, "I hit a girl. Did you see that? I hit her." And he was about to open the door and walk to the front of the car to check it out. But I told him that I didn't see any girl, and he stopped opening the door. He tried to look outside, but everything was dark, and all I could see was the empty road. There was no blood, no dead body, nothing. The beam range from the car was bright enough to see 45 meters ahead. When he calmed down, he didn't say a thing and kept driving. I didn't say a single word as well because the atmosphere was really weird and creepy. When we reached the destination, my dad asked me again, "You didn't see that girl? The girl with long black hair and dressed in white?" At this time, I look at my dad, didn't say a word and shake my head. My dad never mentioned that story anymore, not to anyone in the family. And for some reason, I didn't tell that story to my siblings as well. I don't think I've shared this story before. At the time, I was working IT for a 3-letter formerly great tech company, doing retail point-of-sale upgrades. One of the techs that had been on an overnight job had gotten suddenly sick, and they needed an extra hand in the middle of the night. And I like money, so I went out there in the middle of the night to a site maybe 70 miles away. It was 1 to 2 a.m., and I'm going down roads that I wasn't familiar with. Right before I go around a bend on an empty 2-lane highway with, of course, no streetlights, and road cones are sort of haphazardly set up to start to block off the left lane. I'm in the right, so I don't mind, but it was weird that there were no warning signs or nothing. And then, what seemed like a quarter of a mile down the road, there's a car just stopped in the right lane that I was in. I slow down, and nearly at a stop because I'm a dumb teenager who didn't realize what this was. And out of the car step 2 dudes and start walking towards my truck. Well, I start to nope right out of there and run over a cone to get away. One dude tried to jump in front of me, but I got around him and sped off down the road. The traffic cones had stopped right where the stopped car was. I'm already a very anxious person, so after the panic and adrenaline wore off a few miles down the road, I called the cops to report what happened. Headlights appeared on the horizon behind me, which caused me to panic even more. I told the 911 dispatcher that I thought that I was being followed, and I pulled off at the next exit because it had a gas station. I pulled off, and the car behind me did too. My heart was slamming in my chest as I pulled up at the pump and sprinted into the store, only to find that the car that had pulled in behind me was a completely different car than the one that was stopped in the road, and had a small woman driving it, who had gotten out to pump her gas, instead of the two dudes who had jumped out of their car. After I had collected myself and told the dispatcher that it was someone else, I went out to ask her if she had seen the car stopped on the road after the cones. The lady pumping her gas said that she had seen the cones, but there was no car stopped on the road when she passed by. 15 minutes later, a cop came by the gas station to take my statement about it, and said that they had gotten a similar report a couple of weeks prior, but that was about it. Never heard back about if the cops found anything or not. Years ago, I was driving with my ex-girlfriend back from a wedding in northern Wisconsin, heading towards Madison where she lived. We were probably like 20 or 30 miles away from the city at that point, and it was probably around 1 a.m. My GPS, which was some really cheap brand that my dad got me as a gift from Radio Shack, had been going through some backcountry highways for some reason, after I had stopped for gas instead of getting me back on the expressway right away. I didn't mind. I kind of always found those really peaceful, even though at night they're pretty creepy. My girlfriend was asleep in the passenger seat, so I had turned down the music really quiet to not wake her, which added a bit of the eeriness of it all. I'm like really into this groove of driving, focused on the roads because it was so dark without streetlights everywhere. Then something on the side of the road catches my eye. It was a giant mountain lion, with what appeared to be blood all over its face. I start shaking my girlfriend awake to get her to see it before it was gone, but she woke up too late. I pulled over to the side of the road and asked her to watch the rear view so that she could see this huge thing cross the road, but it never did. She was convinced that I imagined it all, because that area of Wisconsin is not known for mountain lions. But I swear, I saw it. So, I am an over-the-road truck driver in America. I generally stay in the Midwest as I enjoy the open road and less traveled areas. I tend to drive at night because the roads are a lot more empty and there tends to be less traffic construction going on around that time. Around this particular night, I was in Kansas, making my way to Wyoming. I drive for hours at a time nonstop, so before my drive, I stack up on food and drinks. I've accustomed my bladder to hold going to the bathroom after years of truck driving until I can't hold it anymore. Now in Nebraska, I get the urge to pee, so I start finding a part of the road that I'm able to pull over safely without damaging my tires. But this is the backwoods of the country, so finding this would be a little hard but not impossible. When I finally feel that I have found a perfect enough location, I pull over. Since I'm in the middle of nowhere, I have nowhere to pee, besides an empty gallon that contained water, because there's no way I'm stepping outside in the dead of night. As I'm doing my business, I hear a tap. I do want to make it known that I travel in my truck alone. I don't have a partner on the truck, nor a pet of any kind. The truck radio is off, the windows are up, and all you can hear from my perspective is the hum of the truck running. I begin to look for the sound, which at first I thought was my mini fridge, because when it gets unplugged, the melted water from the freezer will leak out and start to make a patter noise on the floor. I checked and it wasn't that, and in realizing this, I noticed the tap sounded more like a small rock hitting the side of the truck, the driver's side in particular. Within my truck, I start to look outside of the driver window, but don't find anything in particular, so I start to look out of all the windows. I don't see anything anywhere, so I start to think it could be the truck itself. I get back in the driver's seat to get out of the truck to look under the hood. As I'm about to step out, another small rock hits my door, and I look out into the side of the road where in the field stand these tall corn stalks. Keep in mind, these corn stalks are tall. I mean, I'm standing on the top step of my truck and I can see right above them. And in looking out into the darkness, I see the top of someone's head. Just the top. Not even a forehead. Just their hair, which was black. The average height of a corn stalk is 8 foot. So, I don't know about you, but whoever that was had an advantage. I get back in the truck and lock the doors, put the window down a tad bit, and yell, "Hey, you need help?" No answer. "Hey man, you good?" No answer. So I say screw it, put the truck in gear and get out of there as quick as I could. I don't even look back, just try to get away from them and the area as fast as the truck will go after being at a standstill on the side of the road. I drive for hours until I reach Wyoming and pull over at a truck stop to get some sleep. Before heading to sleep, I go inside the truck stop to get some food, and as I'm coming back to my truck, I see marks on the back of the passenger side of the truck, as if someone had keyed my truck. I start angrily looking around to see who it could have been, but can't really come to a conclusion, since most of the other drivers weren't in their front seat. Then, I start looking around my entire cab, and notice the marks are also on the back of the cab, near the platform where the cab and trailer connect. I start remembering about the person I saw in the field, and thought it was them, but I don't remember feeling anyone hop on back there. So I was left puzzled. Nothing else happened for the rest of the day, thankfully, so I'm not sure who that person was, or what they wanted or what their intentions even were. And I'm glad that I never ended up finding out. This happened on a road trip with my ex-girlfriend, and I've always wanted to tell this story. We were headed to Eureka, California from Oregon, and had to go on this highway 299. We had a late start to our day, so it was nighttime by the time we set out on 299, thinking it would be just a normal stretch of rainy highway. We were thoroughly unprepared for how twisty and isolated it really was. Midnight came, and it had been pouring rain. My girlfriend was dodging rockfall for the entire drive so far. She was absolutely drained. We found a flat place to pull over for a quick nap, like a little outcrop of dirt alongside the road. The rain had stopped, but it was muddy, and man was it quiet. Eerily so. We were both so drained that we just crashed for about 30 minutes or so in our respective seats. Keep in mind, we'd been on the road for a while and hadn't passed a single car the entire time. I woke up to the sound of scratching underneath the car that I brushed off as an animal. Then I heard steady plopping out in the mud, like someone was circling our car, but I didn't see a thing. I elbowed my girlfriend thinking she was still asleep, but she was fully awake and frozen in place and just said, "I know." She said she had this feeling that something was off from the second that we pulled into that spot. We held deathly still for a bit longer, still reckoning that it was a deer or something, in denial. I got a large wave of goosebumps when we heard that faint scratching start up yet again. This time we bolted into action, and she threw the car into reverse pretty quickly. Suddenly she screamed, "There's someone there, oh my God," as she saw a figure dive into a nearby bush, lit up from the reverse lights. I looked but didn't see anything. We both were in 100% panic mode and practically skidded back onto the road. The rest of the drive back into California was unremarkable, but we did have a motorcycle tail us for most of the way back after that. From a decent distance, luckily. But seeing that faint light bobbing far behind us gave us the creeps on top of everything. It's probably unrelated, but who knows? Everything felt creepy and wrong for the rest of the night. Be careful on Highway 299 in Oregon. This happened some 15 years ago, as I was driving back up north from Newbury in the UK. Now, I don't do anywhere near as much driving as you Americans, but for late night trips, I always operate a buddy system just in case. My friend had taken his rest and woke up about 45 minutes before time to set off. I checked the weather forecast. Heavy fog due across the M1 at around 2 a.m., just as I would be hitting that part of the route. Dang. I asked my buddy if we can set off a half an hour earlier to skip it. He agrees and we set off. We're doing good time thanks to the lack of traffic, but I can see a fog line appearing. It gets thick fast. I take a look at the clock. 1:30 a.m. Dang, weather forecasters got it wrong again, I think to myself. I ask my buddy to stay alert in case I miss something, as I'll be concentrating dead ahead. I have to slow to about 35 to 40 miles per hour from 70 because visibility is basically nil, but stopping the car would be suicide if there's anything behind me. Based on my position, I know there's a service station at about 15 miles, so I'll turn off there and wait it out. The fog starts getting really thick, to the point where I'm thinking maybe it's actually safer to stop. I can't see the road or the cat's eyes at this point. I pull to the left slowly and wait for the telltale feel of the hard shoulders rumble strip. It didn't come, nor has the car hit a ditch. At this point, I'm a bit freaked out, as I have no orientation and I can't see the road. I'm down to about 15 miles per hour now as my buddy says, "Hey, there's a light in front of us." It's a green light, which is odd for the motorway, but maybe I can see what's going on from there. I pick up a little speed and head towards the green light. As I'm driving forward, the fog begins to lift, and I realize where we are. At the intersection of Beverly Road and the A63. The green light was a traffic light. I pull the car over and we both say to each other, "What the heck?" This is approximately 150 miles from where the fog started, a good 2.5 hour drive away. I look at my watch, 1:50 a.m. I take a look at the radio clock in the car, 4 a.m. I get my phone out. My buddy gets his phone out. Both say 1:50 a.m. As I look in the rear view, there's not a trace of fog behind me. Both of us are quite freaked out at this point, so we decide to find out which clock is right. I drive to the station, 4:07 a.m. To this day, I have no explanation, and neither of us can account for the missing 2.5 hours. Not how I managed to do multiple lane changes and junctions to get from the M1 to the M62, and then the A63. My friend and I were driving south towards Gallup, New Mexico in his elderly mother's Prius, bringing it back to Southern California for her from Colorado. It was the middle of nowhere, on a dark road about 2:30 in the morning, when this 1990s safari van starts getting right on our tail. We move over to let the van pass, and he gets right behind us and starts flashing his lights. My buddy gets into the other lane again and slows down enough that I can see the license plate has a piece of cardboard taped over it. The van then starts swerving to try and force us off the road. My buddy floors it, but it's a Prius. We pull ahead for a second, but the van rapidly catches up and starts trying to force us off the road at speed. As we approached an off-ramp, I decided that I had enough of this stuff to pull out my 1911. I rolled down the window and leaned out, presenting my weapon, and prepared to send rounds into this van. The van slammed on the brakes and shot off the off-ramp. We continued into Gallup and phoned the police, who told us that they were probably trying to get us to stop and rob us. They did not expect any problems from a Prius with California plates. This was the scariest situation I have run into while driving, for sure. My friends and I were taking a road trip from Arizona to California. We decided we wanted to go before the sunrise, and we left at about midnight. We were about 3 hours in, but my car needed gas and the girls and I wanted to stop to toke up. We had a considerable amount of weed in the car, and we wanted to get rid of it all before our drive back. So we decided to roll a joint in this poorly lit gas station. We were just about to take a hit when this guy comes running up to my car and starts to pound on the driver's side window. I rolled it down just enough to talk to him, but not enough for him to force entry into my car. He seemed scared and shaken up, but something didn't seem right. He was sweaty, and I could tell that he was looking inside of my car for something. At first, I thought he was an undercover cop, and my heart was racing. However, he said he had some car trouble and asked if we would take a look at it. At this point, it was 3 a.m. I had all my doors locked and had not gotten gas yet. I knew nothing of cars, and neither did any of the ladies in the car. We told him this. I told him I could call a tow for him, although he persisted on using my phone. The other girls were freaking out, and of course I was too. I could see a payphone by the vending machine at the gas station, and told him that I would slip him a few quarters through the crack in my window so that he could call whoever he would like. Out of nowhere, his tone changed. He got really calm and looked me dead in the eye. He told me to unlock the door. My eyes darted towards the direction of his car, and we could see 2 other males pacing while one male was sitting in the driver's seat. I noped right out of there, told him to leave us alone, rolled up the window and hopped right back on the highway. I know for a fact if we had gotten out of the car, we would have never been seen again. I called the police to report him and asked to be notified if there was an arrest made. I never heard back. Arizona is #1 for sex trafficking. Be safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. When I lived in rural Maine, my boyfriend at the time took me on a drive in his truck. He wanted to show me something he said he learned about from one of his college professors. We already kind of lived in the middle of nowhere, but we drove even further into literally nowhere. We were on this road that was 5 to 8 miles of just forest on both sides. No houses, no signs, no driveways, nothing. Then he pulls over near a slight break in the trees. Was a very overgrown old driveway, chained off at the road, with an old, dilapidated sign that said private property. We parked on the road and walked in about a half mile, and there was this old, abandoned log cabin house there. I don't know when it was built, but it was old enough to not have any connection to the electric grid and no electrical outlets inside. It was a bit odd, but my boyfriend said he had been there before and led me to a door in the back where we could break in. He mentioned that the last property owner said in their will that no changes could be made to the property after they died, like no agriculture or major renovations. So I guess that's why the land was never resold, since nobody could do anything with it. I don't remember if we entered through the second floor somehow, or climbed upstairs once inside, but I remember being on this loft that overlooked the interior of the house, with no railing. Definitely a 15+ foot drop right at the edge of the loft. Maybe there weren't stairs inside at all, or a ladder. It was back in the fall of 2011 when I was a freshman in college, so it's a bit fuzzy. I remember seeing an old wood stove made of iron downstairs and a countertop, but otherwise I think the place was pretty sparse and made entirely of wood. There was also no sink in the kitchen area and no bathroom, so no plumbing either. The loft we were on had literally thousands of dead flies all over the floor. It was creepy and gross. I know they could have gotten stuck there over the years, but the sheer number of them on every surface and not being decayed, turned to dust, was just so unnerving. My boyfriend, for some reason, decides this is a nice place to smoke weed. I didn't want to stay, but he laid a blanket out over the flies, and he sat and rolled a joint. I did take a couple of puffs, but started getting an uneasy feeling, so I stopped. I'm a regular smoker, but this was just a crazy situation. Then suddenly I realized that the sun was setting, and we were losing light fast. The house very quickly got this terrifying impending doom feeling, and I knew that I just needed to get out of that house. I expressed my concerns to my boyfriend multiple times, each time seeming more desperate to leave, but he wasn't worried and took his sweet time hand-rolling himself a cigarette and taking all of the unnecessary stuff out of his pockets, laying them out in the blanket and slowly putting them away. It was really making me mad that he wasn't taking me seriously, and I had such a sense of urgency to get out. I ended up getting out of the house first and started running down that half-mile long dirt driveway to get out and away. My boyfriend shuffled behind me, fumbling with things in his hands. He was practically a prepper and carried all sorts of things with him in all his pockets: cargo pants, backpack, etc., at all times, like flashlights, lighters, weed pipes, rolling papers, weed, rolling tobacco, and probably 20 other things he thought were useful. I got out of the woods when we were just losing that last light before the true darkness set in. Mind you, this country road has no streetlights the whole way. He had flashlights, but I didn't feel like flashlights equaled safety. I felt we were being watched, and whatever it was super negative. I don't know if I overacted, or my boyfriend was literally just doped up and clueless, but I never really trusted him after that. I don't know why the heck I let myself get in that situation. Needless to say, he's not in my life anymore. I live in southern Missouri, middle of nowhere. Few neighbors that live several hundred yards away, and are pretty old and nobody is usually out. It's winter, so they are never outside, and it gets dark around 6 p.m. It was 8 p.m. and I was in my shop working when I heard a whistle in the tune of a song sounding like it was just outside of my shop. Nobody had been around, or I would have known. It went on for about a minute, and I got chills down my spine, and a sudden fear rushed over me. So I ran inside to get my wife to come out with me, in case it happened again, but it never did, wondering if anyone else has had any similar experiences with this, or know what it could have been. My friends and I are on our way from Chicago back to our home in Evansville, Indiana. As much as we drive through the Midwestern country to get there, pitch black highways surrounded by trees and cornfields. About 4 hours away from home, my friend screams and I look up. We hit a deer going 50. The poor guy bounces off the front end and is probably dead on impact. We come to a stop to commiserate, call our parents, etc. We are stranded on a highway in the middle of nowhere, trees to our right and a few houses a bit far off to our left, all surrounded by cornfields, of course. My friend is standing outside surveying the damage when we hear a scream, a man's scream, a bit far off to our left. My other friend and I look at each other wide-eyed. A few minutes pass and we hear one again. I make a joke about skinwalkers and my friend gets back in the car. A bit later, after calling 911, we hear another scream. A woman this time, and it seems closer. We're waiting on the deputy, and nervously joking about whether it's skinwalkers or crazy elderly people with sundowners, a la The Visit. And my friend facing the trees suddenly laughs nervously and rolls up the window. I just heard clicking noises outside of my window, and I'm rolling it up because I'm not going to pretend that I didn't just hear them. Anyway, now we're back on our way. The car is drivable. And out of skinwalker country, or whatever the heck that was. Just something spooky that happened, and I thought that I'd share it. I'm in the process of applying for a new job and started contacting various places to see if they were hiring and sending in my resume. About 3 weeks ago, I got a text from a director saying that texting would be easier to keep in touch about filling out my application and setting up interviews. I ended up meeting with him twice, one to see the facility and two for an interview, about 2 weeks ago. Since then, he's passively said things such as how pretty I am, that I would be a perfect fit, etc., but no actual updates on the job. He's also tried asking me out multiple times, but he tries to make it seem like we would be talking about the job. I've tried not to reply as much as possible, and have been ignoring him because I don't want to work with someone like that. Yesterday, he messaged me to tell me that he was sending flowers to my apartment building. I never gave him my address directly, but it was on my application. I said thanks, and then ignored him because I was freaked out. Today, he asks if we could meet up for coffee because he's in my neighborhood. I didn't respond. About 2 hours later, I took my dog for a walk, passed by a coffee shop that is 2 streets over from my apartment building, and he was sitting in a booth right next to the window. We didn't make direct eye contact, and I honestly couldn't tell exactly if it was him. I kept walking, and he almost immediately texted me, asking if that was me that he's just saw. / did I want to come back to the coffee shop? I didn't reply. I live in a huge city, so what are the chances that he was at a coffee shop in my neighborhood, that close to my apartment just by chance? Was he just waiting for my response that whole time? Am I being paranoid about being stalked? Sorry if this is all over the place, and I'm posting from a burner because you can tell what city I live in from my regular account. I'm a 21-year-old girl taking her first backpacking trip around the world. I only arrived in Thailand 2 days ago, and it was unfortunate that I almost got kidnapped on my first night. I went to Bangla Road, which is well known, and had a few beers at a bar, and then went to the popular club, Illusion. I was having a good time, dancing and meeting people. In the club, I only had 3 drinks, tequila and orange juice. But at some point, I realized that I was a lot more drunk than expected. I don't know if it was spiked, but I was dumb and had my drink on the table next to me while I was dancing, and it was very crowded. In total, over the space of 3 hours, I only had 2 beers plus 3 tequilas. Usually, that's an okay amount for me to be aware. I went to the bathroom and felt very intoxicated and threw up. Upon leaving the bathroom, a guy who I do not know grabbed my arm. He seemed young, and I asked him what he was doing. He said he would help me down the stairs. After we got down to the road, he dragged me down to an alley and put me in his car. I was really scared at this point and didn't know how I'd gotten myself into a bad situation so quickly. I'm very small and not very strong, so it was easy for him to take control of me. He started driving, and I kept saying no, and to stop. But he said, "Don't worry, I'm taking you somewhere safe," which in my mind was so scary. I had maps open, and we were driving out of Patong. Finally, after some time, I started telling him that I would throw up all over him and his car if he didn't pull over. This seemed to annoy him, and he pulled over. The second he stopped the car, I got out and ran down the street. Luckily, there was a motorbike taxi who asked if I needed a lift, and I jumped on and told him where my hotel was. I could see the guy walking down the road after me as we sped away. I made it back to my hotel safely. Honestly, after that, I'm not going to any bars or clubs alone. I don't trust anyone, and I'm feeling very vulnerable. At least it was a lesson that I need to be a lot more careful. I'm just glad that I made it out okay. I grew up in the 1990s, born in the late 80s, and I remember getting my first bike and starting to explore the area in which I grew up in upstate New York. Where I grew up is much different now in the 90s. It was more rural with clusters of neighborhoods here and there. I lived near an old capped landfill, and the main road connected a lot of semis down to some factories in a neighboring town that was like a 5-minute bike ride. We also had an old Baptist church that was founded by an eccentric former hippie who was really good to the community. My dad, who was a very serious drinker, loved to fish, hunt, etc., with his friend because it gave him an excuse to drink and kill something. But he ended up making this deal with this pastor and the gentleman who owned it a pond behind the church to stock it with fish, as at the time, my dad and his friends started becoming very serious competitive fishers and went in on a boat, which my dad had to sell his share to eventually keep drinking. So, my friends and I had permission to fish there in the summer, and we would go down and swim and stuff like that. I lived easily less than 5 minutes from this pond, and my friends and I go out there one summer day. This was around 1995. My mom had heard on the news a week prior about a wave of kidnappings. I don't remember if Amber Alerts were a thing then, so she decided to make a code word with me. She came to me and told me that if anyone ever tried to convince me that they knew my mom or dad, in hopes to get me in their car, to ask them for the code word. Ours was pickles. So fast forward to our fishing trips. My friends leave before me after we sat around and actually just swam more than anything. My friend Dennis got mad because he was serious about fishing, so he and his brother left, and I was alone on the road. And this road, once you got past this farm, was a straight shot to the main part of town, and our road was on the right just before the road ended. So I get to my road, and I'm about to turn, and I didn't notice that I was being followed by a beige-collared pickup with this Cletus-looking guy from The Simpsons in it. He greets me and tells me that my mom and dad are waiting for us at this local restaurant, which I knew. He tells me that they asked him to come to get me and to meet them there so that we can all have dinner. I immediately thought of what my mom said and started getting this evil feeling like I was in danger. So I told him that my parents specifically have a password that they give their friends, and that if he was their friend, he was required to tell me, at which point he got mad and started swearing at me. Although I didn't see one, but I was certain he had a gun, and he started fumbling in the truck. I turned and started paddling down my road, screaming for help and that I was in danger. He jerked his truck to follow, but I was making too much noise and was already to my house that he just took off. When I got home, my mom was home, and I was hysterical and asked her why she would ask such a mean friend to pick me up. And I told her what happened, and she didn't believe me. And she calmed me down, told me that I did the right thing, but could tell that I was having a hard time. She also grew up in the same town, and nothing like that had ever happened to her. A few days later, a friend of hers told her a similar story about her son on another part of town. The police then were involved, and the cops came and talked to me, and I gave them the same description of the man, the truck, what had happened, etc. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I used to be very bitter at my mom for not believing me, but I now understand the confusion that she had, and instead of reacting, she just tried to console me and keep an eye on everything. My dad, on the other hand, was more vigilant about it, and would ask me all the time when he'd take me out if someone looked like the guy in the truck, and if they looked like the same truck that I saw. I just hope that no other kids were harmed by him. I'm a 30-year-old female, and I used to live in a small neighborhood from ages 13 to 18. This took place when I was around 15. I spent most of my time just walking around the neighborhood, listening to my MP3 player. Wow, I feel old just typing that. There was a guy around the same age as me that lived maybe 5 or so houses down from me. From neighborhood gossip, I learned that he was homeschooled and had been in and out of juvie due to his anger issues. He was almost always outside, and sometimes when I passed his house, he would start following me. I was smart enough to always have my own music down low enough to be able to hear and be aware of my surroundings. At first, I just passed it off, as he ended up walking the same time of day I did. Looking back, I was truly dumb. As time passed, he got closer and closer to me when following, until he eventually decided to come up right behind me. He said some truly heinous things that I will not repeat here. I mean, he was right in my ear when he was talking. I ran home and told my sister. She was basically who raised me. She told me I was lying and to stop making up stories. For a while, I stopped going out walking until I needed the fresh air and exercise, and tried again after maybe 2 months. Sure enough, there he was, and came right up behind me and started to say things again. I turned my music up and ignored him. This is what I continued to do every day until he got tired of me ignoring him, I guess. Because one day, he grabbed my arm. I couldn't get away. And then he grabbed the back of my neck and told me that I should know better than to ignore him. Again, I told my sister. She didn't believe me, and I stopped going out again. 2 weeks later, I woke up to loud bangs on my bedroom wall. There was a garage on both sides of the house, and the wall of my bedroom shared a wall with one of the garages. This garage was unfinished. There wasn't even concrete down, and it was easily accessible from outside, as it was missing the other door at the back of the house. My sister was out of town, and my dad was deaf and bedridden, so it was just me in the house, able to do anything. My bedroom also had a door to go outside, so I ran over and locked it. I laid down and waited for the banging to stop, but it didn't. My cousin and her boyfriend lived down the street, so I called her, and she sent her boyfriend down to see what it was. Her boyfriend pulled right into the backyard and right up to the door into the garage. His headlights filled the garage, and out ran the guy from down the street, holding a large knife. He took off running, and my cousin's boyfriend followed. It was at this time that I called the police. They came and took a statement, but there was nothing they could do because other than going into the garage and trespassing, he didn't actually do anything. I never took a walk in that neighborhood again. I still wonder how he knew what wall to bang on. How did he know that I was on the other side of it? How did he know that my sister was gone, or that my dad was bedridden and couldn't do anything? I never locked the door, so had he been able to get into my house, who knows what would have happened? What would have happened if I had gone outside? It still gives me the creeps. So, guy down the street, let's not meet again. This incident took place in the summer of 2023. Last year, I transferred with my company to take a new position in a major Midwestern city. My spouse was still working and living back in California for the next few months. So, I rented a studio apartment for myself in a newly renovated apartment building in a popular downtown neighborhood until we could look for a place together. The apartment was small but nice. It was in a secure building with interior hallways and a nice downstairs lobby. I was one of the first tenants to move into this newly renovated building, and other new residents soon started moving in. A major advantage of this move was that I'd only be a couple of hours' drive from my hometown and my parents. I started my new job, and everything was going great. I was enjoying my new neighborhood, and the neighbors in the apartment building generally kept to themselves like I did. Then, a new guy moved in across the hall, and everything changed. We'll call him David. David was a single man in his 60s, and was very different from the college students and young professionals who lived in our building. I started noticing his erratic behavior almost immediately. I would come home from work, and he would be sitting in his car in our small parking lot, just staring off in the distance. We were having issues that summer with smoke clouds coming over from the vast Canadian wildfires. They were leaving a light dusting of ash on our cars, similar to pollen. David was convinced that someone was spraying this dust on his car and was accusing various tenants he would run into in the parking lot. He would hoard trash in his apartment and leave trash bags in the hallway, causing a foul odor. He would also be yelling to himself in the hallway. I finally had enough and complained to the leasing office. The manager was quick to dismiss my concerns, saying that she'd been in his apartment and everything was fine. In August, my parents' 50th anniversary was coming up, and I was excited to go home and spend a weekend with them. A few days before their anniversary, my boss informed me that he would be flying into work on an important project with me that would have us working through the weekend. I was really disappointed and felt like I was letting my parents down, but I managed to get away for a quick overnight trip in the middle of the week to see them and get back before my boss was due to arrive. I drove down and spent the night with them. The next morning, I checked my email as I was getting ready to head back. There was an email from my apartment manager in regard to the incident the night before. The email was very vague, but it stated that a resident was dead, and there would be further details coming later. My heart sank and I immediately went pale. My mind instinctively went to my strange neighbor David. I opened up a local news app for my city, and the top story was about an active shooter in my apartment building who was killed during a SWAT team standoff the night before. Apparently, David approached my next-door neighbor in the hallway with a gun and threatened to shoot him. The neighbor ran into his apartment and called 911. David also called 911 and told the dispatcher that his neighbors were hacking his phone, and if the police didn't come, he was going to start shooting people. The police came and tried to talk to David, but he had barricaded himself in his apartment and claimed to be heavily armed. The state police and the SWAT team soon arrived, and David began firing a rifle out his window at anyone he saw in the parking lot below. All of the neighbors on my floor were trapped in their apartments with no way of escape. They had to get down and barricade themselves from the gunfire. There was another building across the street with a direct line of sight into our apartment building. A police sniper took a position in the building across the street and shot David through his window. Then they flew a drone into his open window and confirmed that he was dead with a gun still in his hand. Luckily, no one else was injured. I got home later that day to a bullet-riddled apartment building, and several neighbors who normally didn't speak to each other were hugging and crying and showing each other videos of the incident from their hiding places. I've never been so lucky to have been out of town. If my boss hadn't messed up my plans, I would have been home that night. I'm sorry David didn't get the mental health attention he needed, but he put so many lives in danger. So this started about 2 to 3 years back. I had just experienced a terrible breakup, and I started receiving these disturbing phone calls. It started simple. The first call I answered, and the person on the other end said how much they miss me. Now I have a very small circle of friends, and I'm not on Facebook or any social site where I update my photos or daily activities. This is important. And I know that the ex that I just split up with had nothing to do with the following. Apologies, it's not short. The first call, like I said, was simple. They said they missed me. I asked who it was and they said it's me. Don't you remember? So I hung up and they immediately called back, crying. upset that I was being mean. The caller was clearly an adult male, but they were talking as though they were a very young child, around 6 years old. I hung up again, and they didn't call back. Looking back, I should have blocked the number, but as I mentioned, I just got blindsided by a breakup, and I wasn't thinking very well. Then they kept calling. They would call, and if I didn't answer, they left messages, saying how pretty I looked with my blue sweater that day, or that they knew how I took my coffee now, and said that they would remember it for when we finally went out for a drink together. I blocked the numbers. They would call from another. I answered one day, yelling at them to leave me alone, and hung up again. When they called back, it wasn't the boy, but his mother. She was very upset, said that I was hurting her boy by not wanting to play, and you could very clearly hear the boy crying and screaming in the background. At this point, it dawned on me that this wasn't a joke, or a prank, or something like that. There was something seriously wrong with these people, and they were obviously watching me. For a few weeks following my breakup, I had to live in my car. The entire time, I hardly slept. I was terrified, thinking that I would wake up one day and see them standing outside of one of my windows. When I finally got a place, he called me to congratulate me, and he couldn't wait to come play. I haven't heard from these people for about a year now, but I checked my phone after a very busy workday and noticed 10 missed calls, and I'm terrified to check my voicemail. I've reached out to cops, but they won't do anything since I haven't been explicitly threatened, and I've been advised to just block calls. I'm going to change my number, but I'm terrified that the calls will continue even after that, and that it will upset them even further. I posted this on the advice subreddit, and people have been kind to reach out with advice and tips, but I feel like I'm living in a horror movie. It was a Friday night, and I had gone to bed early, as I had work on Saturday morning. After reading in bed for a bit, I drifted off at around 10:30 p.m., only to wake up about an hour later to loud screams and people yelling profanities. I thought that my girlfriend was watching a movie with the volume way up, and I went out into the lounge room to ask her to turn it down a little. Instead, the TV was off, and my girlfriend was staring at the front door with her eyes wide. Our apartment is on the ground floor of the building, so our front door opens directly out into the lobby of the building. The voices in question were coming directly from the lobby. I couldn't make out specifics. In my defense, I was half asleep, and the language of the country that I live in is not my first language. But there was a lot of swearing involved. My first thought was that it was some kind of domestic dispute. But after listening, I realized that it was a group of men that sounded extremely aggressive. I looked at the WhatsApp group chat for my apartment building, and to my horror, I saw a message from one of the people in it, that there were armed men in the building, and that we should not leave our flats. The country that I live in is experiencing a marked uptick in crime, and I had heard stories of armed groups of men robbing entire apartment blocks. But these had seemed fairly apocryphal to me. However, that was my first thought, that these men would kick down our door and rob us. One of my dogs started to growl at the commotion outside. I shushed him, and thankfully he obeyed. I heard a commotion in the apartment above me and went out to my patio to see what was happening. I heard what sounded like a large piece of furniture being knocked over, and women and children screaming in terror. At this point, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that by now they would have robbed us already, if that is what they had planned to do. My girlfriend and I decided to hide in a small shed at the end of our patio, monitoring the group chat on our phones. Our bigger dog silently stood watch outside of the door of the shed, his eyes locked on the sliding door at the end of the patio. I would find my smaller dog later, cowering between the washing machine and the dryer. After 10 extremely tense minutes, I heard the screeching of tires, signaling what I hoped was the perpetrators fleeing the scene. Eventually, someone in the group chat said that the police had arrived, and breathing a huge sigh of relief, I came out of hiding and opened the front door. Alarmingly, on the floor of the lobby, there were zip ties that had been cut, and the security guard was talking to one of the tenants. The man was bleeding from a large gash on his face and looked extremely shaken. Over the next few hours, the story would unfold. The man that I saw with the gash on his face was the tenant in the upstairs apartment, the one that I had heard the commotion coming from. He was the owner of an import/export business, and for whatever reason had a sizable sum of money in cash hidden in his apartment. Someone had obviously found out about it and planned out the robbery that woke me from my sleep on Friday night. A group of 8 men had followed him into his apartment building's garage and ambushed him as he got out of his car, and judging from the gash on his face, roughed him up a little bit. Some of the group of 8 had gone to the lobby, surprised the security guard and zip-tied him. The remainder of the group had gone up to the apartment, robbed it, and then fled the scene. It's fairly chilling to think that armed men were meters from my front door. So, to the armed men that stormed my apartment building to steal my neighbor's cash, let's not meet. This happened while in my early 20s. My best friend was always getting into some risky stuff. While she did various drugs, I was always more of a pothead. When they said that pot was a gateway drug, I believe it's true to a certain extent with those who have addicted personalities. She definitely developed an addiction issue later on. My friend, her name was Kay, was always down to meet new people. She used to friend random people on Facebook or Instagram. She would ask me to hang out so that when they left, she met people and I was the buffer, just in case they didn't like each other. One day, she came over to my house unannounced and was like, "Hey, let's go to my uncle's house," because her aunt was there, and her aunt had some goods. Her aunts happened to be down the road. Her aunt and her uncle were known as dealers in the area, so we went. When we got there, she was like, "Hey, I met this guy online. He goes by Joey Crack." Then she shows her aunts his pictures, and a wide-set man with a red goofy face, cornrow braids, face tattoos, and a gold grill. I laughed and said, "Wow, Kay, you really know how to pick 'em." She had already invited him over, so upon his arrival, he then comes out of nowhere, just walks right up to Kay, gives her a hug, and everyone else there a kiss on the cheek. This part of town, there was nothing around, just houses, a school, and woods. The closest store was about 20 minutes away, so it struck me as odd that he walked there. So it was me, Kay, her aunt, and the aunt's friend. We sit and get 3 joints in a rotation. By this time, both aunts are high as a kite on coke, and they take a few puffs, then go inside the house, leaving me, Kay, and Joey Crack outside. Joey then starts asking us questions like how we know each other, what we do for a living, etc. It was getting late, so I was telling her that I was wanting to go home. She was like, "No, don't go yet." I told her I was tired and that Joey is weird, and he kept low-key hitting on me. She then tells me that he had asked to sleep with her, and he wanted to ask her if I was down. I laughed it off and said, "Are you crazy?" And after a while of silence, I deflected and heard some noise that was in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" After a bit of small talk between him and Kay, he then learnt that neither of us was interested. It was just a hangout. This then turns the mood. You could feel it. It was suddenly eerie. He got reserved and shifty-eyed. I sat down for a while just to please Kay. At one point, I turned to Joey, knowing that he walked here and it was kind of dark by now. "What are you about to do? Because I'm about to go home and Kay's coming with me." He was like, "I just texted my boy. He's about to come get me." when he was texting Kay, was right behind him, watching him text. Her eyes grew wide, and she looked at me. That was silent girl code for what the heck. Kay broke the silence and was like, "Hey, come help me get this thing from inside to bring it out." So I did. We went inside, and she was like, "I'm going to call my uncle so that he can take us to your place." And I was like, "Why?" My house was like a 10-minute walk. She said, because when she was looking at Joey's text, he sent to whoever was coming to pick him up the information of all of us here. He noted that our aunts were high on coke, as us along with our age. He was telling his boy to come over to basically rob and R-word us, and called dibs on the blonde one. I was the blonde one. Every hair stood up on my body with the thought of some gross goon trying to have his way with me. I was mad, because she got me into this. We came back out and continued our conversation with him so that he wouldn't get suspicious of us. She mentions out loud that her uncle was on his way home. As he pulls in, a sigh of relief comes over me. They speak briefly, and Joey then departs into the darkness before his ride even shows up. Kay and I get a ride from her uncle to my house. On the ride, we noted how weird Joey was. Later that night, as I was going back to bed, I check my Facebook, and I have a friend request from Joey and a message. "You're so pretty. I would love to have some alone time with you without your friend." The message ended with his number. I never blocked someone so fast. And after this, Kay didn't learn a lesson, but that's another story for another time. A week later, Joey was in the news. He was wanted for SA, robbery, and drug possession. A bullet well missed on my part. Joey cracked, "Let's never meet again." Okay, so for context for this story, I live in a pretty rural area. We live on the outskirts of our town, which already is small compared to the populations of the other towns in California. We're about 15 minutes from the small town and 40 minutes from the main city. We live down a dirt road with some neighbors. Our house has no other fences attached to ours, and on two sides of the house is only fields and dirt roads, one side having a single house in the field. The other two sides have a couple neighbors down other roads, and nobody really interacts out here except my dad talking to two of them sometimes. I was probably 12 when this happened. I had low self-esteem, and I wanted to start exercising more. I had been enrolled in a charter school due to bullying. Yes, that played into my self-esteem, but let's get on with the story. So I didn't really have many ways of exercise besides a treadmill that we owned. I wanted to start getting fresh air too, so my mom suggested that since we live out here, that it would be peaceful to take walks down the back dirt road. I agreed even though I was stubborn about it half the time, but we began walking and usually would go in the mid to late afternoon when it would start cooling down outside, but was still light. In case it got dark, we took our flashlight too. Being out here, it was notorious for stray dogs to sometimes make their way out here, and we would carry pepper spray and a mini bat, just in case one got vicious. However, a dog will play into this story. One day, me and my mom decided to go on a walk in the later afternoon. So me and my mom took off and started walking down the road. When you walk about a quarter of a mile down the road, you start to come towards a little cross section. There's a road going left to the highway, a road going right to the neighbor's house, or the road goes straight down to a utility road. Me and my mom discussed walking down the utility road to get a good walk in, since it went on for a while. When we started getting to the crossroad, this dog came out of literally nowhere. We were looking at it, and it was in the center of the road staring at us. Me and my mom looked at it, and my mom said that she got this feeling in her stomach that we needed to turn around and walk home. So she grabbed my arm and started leading me back home, and then let go so that we could walk. We were in the midst of walking when she looks ahead and stops to stare at something. I ask what she's looking at and she points. A white car pulled up to our fence and quickly backed up and shot down the road on the side of our house. Mind you, nobody ever goes down this road except one old man that we know. Anyone else who does usually is scoping out my dad's tools to steal. My mom said she felt a bit uneasy because of it and pulled me to the edge of the dirt road, almost into the field. The car had driven to the highway and left, or so we thought. We continued walking back to our house when this car comes back and drives down the road we were walking alongside. I caught a glimpse, and it was this smaller white car with black tinted windows that you couldn't see through. My mom instantly got a feeling of impending doom and pulled me into the field. Not too far, but far enough. We kept walking through the field towards our house, getting closer now, when this car comes back down the road. My mom stops me in my tracks to see what the car is doing, and it drives back to our house and starts driving around it super fast. For context, we have a random road and area that goes around our yard on our property. My mom waits until the car drives back down the side road, and she tells me we need to start running, so that's what we did. We started running through the field, getting to one of the little sections near my yard. The car comes back and drives down the road trying to cut us off. Me and my mom are panicking at this point and have no idea who this is and why they're acting like this. The car circles around again, and my mom drags me to further to the right, I think, of where we were and told me we're going to run down into the ditch. We get down in the ditch and the car comes back around and pulls to the edge of the ditch where we were. The front of the car was facing us, and all I could think about was if it drove down, it would hit me and my mom and probably kill us. My mom quickly put her arm in front of me and stood dead still while I was literally horrified and dropped our flashlight and I think my water bottle. The car was getting ready to drive down where we were, and then suddenly they backed up and drove around the yard, going back down the side road to the highway. Me and my mom felt like our souls left, and she tells me to run, don't look back, and get to the front gate. I run up the ditch, feeling my heart pounding. I run around the yard and towards the front gate, flinging it open, and I started running towards the front door. I did not hear my mom behind me. I was running to the door to open it right when I looked over and saw the car coming back down the side road. I ran into the house, trying to catch my breath. I saw the car drive down the road, and I didn't see my mom, so I was panicking. I ran towards the sliding glass door, and suddenly my mom comes running towards it and flings it open, running in and locking it. She tells me to go lock the front door while I try to catch my breath and tell her I was scared because I had no idea where she was. She went to chug some water from the fridge and told me that when I was running, she was trying to shut the front gate when she noticed the car coming back down the road. She said she knew she wouldn't have time to follow me to the door, so she ran behind my sister's car to stay out of view of the car, and when it drove back down the road, she took the opportunity to run to the back door since it was closer to my sister's car. It's crazy to think that if we hadn't seen that dog standing there in the road and decided to turn back, that we may have been run down. Fortunately, we haven't seen the car again, and think it may have just been some crazy person or druggie who just so happened to come down our road that day. I don't know how long this will be. It took me about 4 days to actually be able to type this out. I got weird mini anxiety attacks when I tried. I'll be the first person to admit that I have a very can't happen to me complex. And that's kind of what occurred in this story. I'm a university student and live in a rental house with 5 other people. It's far from ideal, but in this housing outcry that we're living in, it takes that sting off of us having to pay a bunch of money a month to exist in a box. This has relevancy, I swear. I got extremely lucky last weekend when the 5 of the roommates that I had were all out for the weekend. This has never happened, so I was ecstatic to have the house to myself. I did the whole 21-year-old girl home alone stuff that you can think of. Watching the movie with the volume loud, taking really long showers, walking around the house in my pajamas, etc. It was around 10 p.m. I had finished some homework and was relaxing with a glass of wine and watching some streaming services. It sounded briefly like there was something moving on the porch. We've had a fox in our yard before, and the thing used to make a lot of noise on our porch, so I assumed that to be the case. After hearing some fumbling the second time, I went over to check through the window. There was nothing there. As I'm turning to head back to the living room, a piece of cement flies through our kitchen window. I didn't know it was cement at the time, but not important. I think I peed myself a little when it happened, but I definitely screamed like a little girl. My moronic self started unlocking the door to go outside, but common sense seized control of me yet again and locked the door back. I also ran to the back door to make sure that it was still locked, even though it's glass and wouldn't make a difference. Oddly enough, at this time, my grandma's words came into my head about something her own mother had told her. If someone tries to break into your house, turn the lights off. You know the inside of your house better than they do. I shut the lights off in the living room and managed to turn the TV off, which was hard because my hands were shaking. My dad used to give me and my siblings advice on protection measures, which were not resonating at this time. I secured myself in my upstairs bedroom, roast me if you want to, and had turned all the lights out in the house as I passed them. While walking up the stairs, I could hear the doorknob shaking furiously from the front door. I don't know if there was more than one person, or if they realized that they couldn't jump the fence to get into the backyard. While calling for emergency services on speaker, I secured my hunting knife to the end of my hockey stick with hot pink duct tape. I know that's probably one of the most Canadian things that I could say. If I was going to have to use it, at least it would look fabulous. I stayed in the dark holding my makeshift spear for what was probably about 15 minutes. I'm really glad that I wasn't being murdered in that amount of time. The operator told me that police were coming, which they eventually did. It took a very unsettling amount of time. The only reason I left the bedroom in the first place was because I heard knocking on the door downstairs, and I saw the police lights were flashing through the window. Otherwise, someone would have had to have come in and physically pull me out of the room. A statement was given, but that's all they did. Literally all they did. Nothing else. Just that. A very nice female officer stayed with me in the house and helped me clean up the glass until my brother showed up to bring me to his place for the rest of the weekend. So, shout out to Officer Cutie with her tattoos. I made an appointment with a doctor to get out on anxiety medication, as well as medicine for nightmares. I know that I wasn't in any physical danger at that point, but I've had some very charming dreams about similar scenarios, and I was just finding it easier to stay awake. Maybe that's juvenile of me, but I'm human. The meds are working fine, and I'm back at my house with wall-to-wall people again. And honestly, I don't hate that so much anymore. Please, have a fun and safe weekend. Never move in with a man or woman that you've never personally known. I got a roommate from hell this way. The man tortured me psychologically when I turned down his advances, then stole thousands of dollars from me over time. Even used my Amazon account to open up an account. He got some of my personal info like social security number and stuff like that as well. Once I left after calling the cops to help me leave, he showed up at the Apple store that I was just at a day after I left. Even though I left to go live on the streets, no family or friends as I was severely abused as a kid. I've been on my own since 14 actually, so I'm accustomed to surviving on the streets for periods of time. I was a million times happier than I ever was in his nice apartment, surrounded by nice things and a fancy car. I felt so relieved even just living in a concrete garage. I was a million times happier sleeping on a concrete with a pillow made of a towel and a tiny little blanket in the cold and heat than I ever was living there with him. He spent his time psychologically torturing me, and I don't regret leaving at all. He would bang on the wall across from mine every morning and late at night to startle me awake. He'd throw pebbles or tap on my window in the middle of the night to scare me and keep me on edge. He'd give me weird little candies and teddy bears as if we were dating. Even ordered stalkerish love items from my own Amazon account. Who the heck spends this much on a Christmas ornament that says, "I'll always love and follow you," or something along those lines? If I'd go to the restroom, he'd run and kick his foot at the door so loud and suddenly that it sounded like a door being kicked down. He'd steal my items if I left them alone for even a second, so I'd have no way to go out if I had plans. Then he'd put them back once I mentioned them, or when it was too late for me to leave for my plans. He kept me home this way. If I got any mail or a package, he'd interrogate me. "What did you order? I need to know." Like he owned me or something. Towards the end, I was leaning doors and furniture up against the door because he picked my bedroom lock before I was gone. And when I'd wake up, sometimes there was stuff missing or moved in odd ways, so I knew that he was creeping around while he was asleep. He was an absolute freak. I wouldn't put anything past him since he showed me how psychotic he was. If I was happy or in a good mood, he'd start criticizing and nitpicking at my body, hair, face, behavior, voice, anything that he thought that I was insecure about. I even developed an ED because he always did this and mocked/laughed at me when I would make or eat food. Anytime I'd leave my bedroom, he would rush out of his room to stand right behind or near me like a weird little dog that follows you around panting. He'd throw out food that I just bought, steal my cash, and even use my debit cards. He even ordered 30 to 40 plus items off of my Amazon account without my knowledge or consent. It was the strangest thing. If anyone else had dealt with this, they'd go insane. I still have trouble believing this stuff happened, as it was just so crazy to even think that someone is that crazy to do something like this. So I've never posted on this subreddit, though I have other stories that I've buried deep until recently. But this is happening in the present. I've had people stalk and follow me before, and because of that and my true crime addiction, I've become supremely paranoid and a solid curtain twitcher. I'm a 31-year-old female, and I reside in an upstairs room that was my first room to myself as a child. I had to leave a bad situation and therefore ended up back at my childhood home. For reference, when our house was built, we were told that the field to our left, with horses and a barn at the time, would one day soon be a development. It was 2000 when we were told that, and it wasn't until 2022 that roads were being formed and foundations laid. I had already had someone follow me home before when I was young. I posted about it, but I don't know how to link it. But I was in a different bedroom next door. My parents put in a free library that's right below my window, and nighttime security lights that are very bright and turn on and you're within like 20 foot of the side of my house my room is on. I'll admit, having an open field next to me so long made me accustomed to not closing the curtains when I change, because there was never anyone to watch. But now there is. For the past 2 weeks, the burglar lights next to the free library have been going off late at night. Because my one side of the curtain is open, so I can use my vape. That's the only reason I noticed it at all. I didn't think too much at first. We lock all the doors and windows every night, and I'm on the second floor. I also always looked out to see if it was a car, someone walking their dog or a deer, only to see nothing. To add, they put in a crap ton of streetlights around this area, so visibility is great. But it just kept happening. So last night I did my usual, and I saw the lights come on out of my peripherals. I acted natural, giving full view out the window that I was going to bed. It was about 3 a.m., turning the TV off, closing the window and curtains, turning the light out, etc. Then I ducked down, peering through the curtains to the sidewalk below. I honestly thought that I was going to pass out when after a few minutes, maybe 5, someone comes out from the side of my house, all silhouette, dressed in black. They kept their back to me until the light turned off, but I swear I could still see them standing there, looking up like they could see me. I called the police, but while I was on the phone with the operator, I saw him run off. There wasn't much they could do, except say they'd drive a car around and look. My parents are asleep and I know that I have to tell them tomorrow. This scares the crap out of me. If it hadn't been happening for weeks and was a solo incident, I would probably be fine about it. But the fact that the light has been going off without me seeing activity, and what happened last night, makes me think this person has been watching me, and watching my house. To the person outside my window, let's please never meet. Small update. I did tell my parents, and at first they brushed me off, claiming I'd had a couple of drinks and it was late, so I probably just saw someone checking out the library. I then had another conversation about it with my dad, who said that there had been reports in the last couple of weeks of car break-ins, and since my car is parked on my side of the street right outside my window, maybe they were trying to break into it. I pointed out that if he was trying to get into my car, why was he pressed up against the house where he wasn't visible from my window? And why did he at no point go towards my car? I think I freaked him out enough that we are going to potentially get a camera for that area. Given all the development happening around us, I think it's smart, even without this incident. Thank you all for your advice and replies. I'll update here again if anything happens. This story takes place in the Balearic Islands of Spain around 2007. As every late August, my mom, grandma, aunt, and I would book a trip to Mallorca. We're all from northeastern Spain, but love the sun just as much as Brits do. Anyway, our room overlooked the sea. It was located on the first floor. I had just turned 8 years old, and every night for a week we would enjoy the nightlife from our terrace. It was our 5th night in, and since there would be different booths at night where you could get tattoos, personalized jewelry, etc., just underneath the terrace, we would sit and watch people get stuff done like hair, tattoos, etc. There's this guy getting a tattoo. He's sitting in a weird position, so he can't really see what's going on with his girlfriend. My mom notices that some random guy starts groping her. She's obviously uncomfortable and her boyfriend doesn't know what's going on at all. He's completely oblivious. Mom doesn't know any English besides very basic words, so she starts shouting, "Hey, stop." Mallorca is filled with foreign tourists, and they all look foreign to us, the perpetrator and the couple. So that's why she started shouting in English. The guy notices and stops groping her, but gives us a deathly stare. He then starts again, and now we're all shouting stop from our terrace. People start to notice there's something wrong, and keep looking at us in a weird way. He then freaks out and tries to get in our hotel. Thankfully enough, he couldn't get in because you needed a code in order to do that. However, 2 German girls were about to use that same door to get out, so we started to shout no, no. This dude kept leaving and coming back to see if he could come up with a way to get in. We didn't know what his intentions were, but we were all pretty shaken. We went to the front desk and eventually called the police to let them know that there was a man who was desperately trying to get into our room. All I remember is crying and thinking that I was going to get kidnapped or something. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.